All right, welcome to the old switcheroo. We're talking gaming retro with Mike and Jaymo.
I'm Mike.
And I'm Jaymo. Welcome to episode one. We're tentatively calling this one What's All That Racket? We are going to be covering four different tennis games in the Nintendo Switch online catalog with the goal of eventually getting through all of them. So if you haven't had a chance, be sure to check out episode 0. We weren't quite sure if we were going to upload it, but I think it went pretty well. Mike, how are you feeling about that last episode?
I think it went well, and I'm good calling it episode 0 because a lot of programming languages, you start counting at 0. So I think this is perfectly fine.
It also has a bit of like a manga anime kind of feel to it. So last week we covered transforming platforming games. We covered Kid Chameleon, Jelly Boy, and Claymates. And so today we're moving on to 4 different tennis games. We have a personal history with tennis, Mike. You literally taught me everything I know about tennis, I think.
Yeah, and my reward for that was that you were a team captain and I was not, which I always enjoyed the irony of.
You weren't team captain at some point?
No, I was not.
So you were way better and in hindsight, much more responsible than I was. So I think on every metric of what makes a good captain, it should have been you.
Likability.
Well, I don't know. I had so much fun at the Saugus tennis team. I really, like, years later want to thank you for getting me to try that out because we didn't even have access to a tennis court to practice before trying to join the team. We practiced against your garage door.
That we did.
And the driveway was all cracked, and your garage door was flat, so it was at least sort of not the worst practice surface. Do you recall what happened the very first time my racket ever touched ball?
I don't recall specifically. I'm going to go with it cleared the house.
I did. It went completely over your house and into the bushes. And I remember I was immediately struck with so much embarrassment. And you were just like, that's okay. We're going to try again. That's why we have a whole basket of these.
Yeah.
So you wanted to start off by going over some tennis terminology because I think you're going to get pretty technical with how you're discussing this at times. So why don't you give our listeners a run through of what you want them to know about tennis as a sport before we dive into the games?
Yeah, so we are starting with the most video gamed sport, because really Pong is just tennis.
Right.
So it has a long history of being adapted in some fashion. But I think all of these games will sort of reflect a little bit more of actually how tennis works to at least some extent. So the first thing to start off with that I think most people are familiar with is that the point system for tennis is a very non-intuitive approach.
It's got some weird terminology.
Yeah, which is that you start at love for 0. The next points are 15, and then 30, and then 45. Sorry, and then 40. So we have 15, 30, 40. And then if you are at 40 and the other player is at 30 or less and you get another point, you've won the game. If you get to a tie at 40, then you go into deuce.
I think you mean deuce. As they say in one of these games, deuce.
At which point, one player is going to have to win the first point. We then refer to it as them having the advantage. So usually it's advantage in or advantage out.
Advantage out means when it's a tie game, but you just missed a point, so you're about to lose on the next point. That's advantage out, right?
Yeah. Advantage in is, I think it's usually in reference to the server.
Yes.
So advantage in would be I think generally be the server has gotten 1 point and needs 1 more to win.
But if they screw it up, they go back to deuce. So yes. a deuce duel can. I remember in high school tennis, sometimes they would last like 5-10 minutes, just going back and forth in and out of deuce. Is there an official limit to how many deuces you can have?
I do not believe so. In fact, and this I will bring up something sort of similar to that question in a little bit.
Okay, getting ahead of you. Sorry.
Yeah, some of the limits of how this works with tennis. So each of those games, one player is serving for each game. And then you have sets of multiple games. So a standard thing, especially when you look at something like professional tennis, is playing a set to the first person to be winning 6 games, but also still winning by 2 games.
Yeah, it's kind of like the scoring of an individual round of tennis. It's not so much about how many points, but you have to be to a certain number and also a certain amount ahead. So it's sort of like a comeback mechanic built into the rules of tennis.
Yeah, and often there will be, for the first sets in a whole match, the first sets will be win by 2, or there's a tiebreaker at 6-6.
Right. Which I got to in Mario Tennis, and it was like tiebreaker, and I'm like, what is this? I don't think I've ever seen this, and I was on an actual tennis team.
Yeah, I don't think we may not have done that, because that is very much a rule that even within like professional tennis, some of these rules for quite a while varied by, which tournament it was.
So, but before we get away from it entirely, I'm just curious because you know a lot of useless stuff, and I mean that as a compliment. I don't mean that as an insult. Do you know why the scoring is 15, 30, 40? Like, why does it? Because for a second, it seems like it makes sense. Like, okay, 15 points per point, which is weird on its own. But why would it go from 30 to 40 if the first 2 increments were 15?
I do not recall. I feel like a lot of what we end up with has something to do with the fact that a lot of this came out of French. So like the origins of deuce is a French phrase that's been shortened.
I was going to grammatically correct you. You mean it came out of France, Mike? You're like, no, you came out of the language French.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. And then there's generally 3 or 5 sets. I think we'll see both of those. I think we'll mostly see the 3 show up. 5 sets tends to be what it is for like men's professional tennis.
Right. But you say men's like it's different for women's?
Yes, for women's it's generally 3. So they're playing best of 3 sets. Men are playing best of 5.
Is that still the way it is today?
Yes.
That's weird, right? Because I assume it was like it originated as some sort of like, well, men and women have different physical abilities, which, it's funny. This tennis podcast, Mike, is going to get political later. And I didn't think it would get political already. But, the capabilities of athletes according to gender is a very hot topic right now. But do women marathon runners don't run a shorter distance? You see what I'm saying? Like, is stamina really different enough to keep that rule? Do you get what I'm trying to ask?
I'm not sure to what extent there's discussion of should that be changed or not.
I mean, based on these games, I'm like, let the guys play 3 rounds too, because these matches went on and stretched. I got a little bored.
Yeah, hold that thought, because I am going to return to that.
Got it.
Yeah. So, the very simple thing that I think everyone knows is your job is to get the ball from one side of the net to the other.
Right.
So I'm not going to worry too much about the very basic mechanics of this.
And that's called a plunky, right? When the ball goes over the net, it's a plunk. I'm just messing with you. I'm sorry. I was trying to make like a deuce joke. Continue.
So generally, from more like the strategy of this is that you have both players are starting at the baseline. One is serving, the other is receiving that serve.
And the baseline is the back edge of the court.
And the baseline is that back edge of the court.
Right.
And so that is where both players are starting. Once the ball is in play, the real goal of this is to control the ball, because the more you can control the ball, the more you can control your shots. Then that means the less that you are running, which I'm a huge fan of, the more your opponent is running, and the more there's the chance that they simply cannot get to the ball in time.
Yeah, and that was your strategy when we played high school ball. I don't know if that would be the term, but like I hope you don't mean mentioning this, but I think it's, part of your story. Like you have your feet are different. And so it's like you have limited mobility. And I think
it should be clear, like this is different from other people, not that my feet are different from one another. That is very normal.
So, with your limited mobility, I always, first of all, admired that, you were on a sports team, because I think a lot of people, if they have I don't know if a handicap is the term, but like if they have an obstacle, it's like, well, I can't play tennis because of this. And you figured it out and your ball control was really good. And I never liked playing against you because I was always scrambling everywhere to try to get to where you hit the ball. Whereas I hope you don't mind me saying, I think I had better mobility than you, but definitely I had trouble getting the ball go to a specific part of the court.
Yeah, no, that really is actually, this is far from just a me thing. Therein is much of the crux of tennis is control the ball, make the opponent have to do the harder work.
Right.
Because it is a lot of work to be scrambling over the court. And so one of the key other steps to doing this is while you're starting at the baseline, there's a lot of court between you and the net.
Right. There's the most court.
Indeed. And so one of the other key things is the idea of what's called an approach shot, which is basically a shot that is to give you time to get from the baseline up to the net. And basically,
right, because
the advantage there is at the baseline, you've got a lot of time to respond, but so does your opponent.
Yeah.
If you can get up to the net, now there's a wide angle that you can hit the ball on and have a pretty good chance of making sure that goes in. And that means you can make them run more.
I really like to think that this is going to take off, and the podcast, I mean, and there's some young lad who's like taking notes right now because he's like in high school tennis. And I don't think our coaches really taught us a lot of the technical stuff. And that's not necessarily a criticism of them because I wouldn't want that job. Coaching seems really stressful to me. But I think I remember learning more of this stuff from you than from our people who were probably supposed to be paid to teach us.
I mean, they were being paid to coach us, not necessarily paid to teach us.
That's a good distinction. Yeah. And if they're listening right now, I had a lot of fun and I enjoyed being on tennis. So please don't feel bad. Okay, so what else do you want to go over before we get to the first game here?
So one of these things, and this ties back to control of the ball is key, is one of the sort of almost assumptions with how a lot of tennis works is the assumption that the player that's serving is the player that is going to win in most cases.
Is that how it is in these games and actual tennis?
Not always. That is exactly part of what I want to bring this up because it is weird how it's not.
Okay.
To me. And that's part of why, like, you see why sets require winning by 2 is that way. It means that this isn't simply whoever served first gets to the right number of points to win first.
Right, because you need to have that gap that you can bridge so that because there's already a built-in advantage from one player by having them be the server, if they're good enough, that is.
Yeah, and so that's generally referred to as if the player is serving and wins, that's holding their serve, which is very common.
Right.
If the other team, the team or player, the one that's getting the serve, if they win, that is referred to as breaking the serve, and that is harder to do. And I wanted to give a quick real-world example of just how much of a sort of standard it is that whoever is serving probably is going to win.
Sure.
And this was a very famous game when it happened in 2010 at Wimbledon, which is the UK's main tennis tournament. And I should clarify, held in the UK, worldwide competitors. And so it was John Isner and Nicholas Mahut. And so they're playing best of 5 sets. The first set was 6-4. The second,
so advantage for the server.
The second was 3-6.
Okay.
The next 2 sets, they each won by winning a tiebreaker when they got to 6-6.
I don't follow. I'm sorry. There's a lot of numbers. I'm trying to. Can you dumb it down for me?
Okay. So the first one was.
What do these numbers demonstrate to you?
They are how many games in the set they won.
Yeah.
But so so at the end of four sets, they were tied 2-2.
Right.
There is no tiebreaker in the 5th set. The 5th set was finally won 70-68.
70 points to 68 points.
70 games to 68 games.
Wait, and each game you're like having to earn the 4 scores plus 2. Wait, so was this all in a single day? You buried the lead on the story, Mike. You should have started with this. How long was this? One day?
This was split up over a few different days.
Okay, I was gonna say there's no possible way they could have played that many games.
Yeah, and that's because this game. So there's 183 games that they played, which took them just over 11 hours. That last set alone, at over 8 hours, would have broken the record for the longest game, or for the longest match. I mean,
how did I? It makes me mad because I feel like if this was a different sport, this would have been like, something that the whole world had talked about. But that seems insane. And so did they just hate each other by the end of this? Or, like even when it was over, though, even the losing player must have been kind of relieved. You know what I mean?
I think it seems like they're in somewhat good spirits because they did something to sort of mark the 10-year anniversary of this
huge battle.
The fact that it took that long did take a bit of a toll. And so there was questions. There's now rules so that doesn't happen quite that long again.
Right. It's the sports equivalent of like a filibuster.
Yeah. It was basically the realization we're like, because this is in the middle of a tournament, this started messing up all kinds of scheduling things because you have a game that should be done in a few hours that took up a couple days of a court.
Right.
And the crazy part, though, so it's 183 games. The player that was serving held serve 180 games.
Wow.
So the only reason that you see anyone winning anything other than in a tiebreaker, basically there is one game where serve was broken in the first set, the second set, and eventually the fifth set.
So it's interesting that this bothers you so much because, like, I'm sure the listeners can tell that, like, you understand at this point the fundamentals of tennis and also the mechanics, the strategies to it. I don't think the average person knows that. So I feel like you find it odd that in these games, it's so much easier to break serve, but I think it would be less engaging if it was so hard to break serve, because then I feel like subconsciously the player would be less invested when it's not their turn to serve. See what I'm saying? Like, I think by making breaking serve so much easier, you're preserving some sort of gameplay balance.
Well, it's the break. Even with that, the breaking serve ends up being important because that is how you win, is when you can break serve. So that is usually the key thing. So a general thing is more reflective of, I'm sort of surprised how much of a pain it was to try to hold serve.
Right.
And in part because this is an element of how much control of the ball do you have.
Right. So should we get into the first game then? Because I think we'll have a lot to say about like ball control with the first one. So we're going to start off here with aptly named tennis. And just right away, Mike, I got so nostalgic for the era when gaming was so new that you could just call your game tennis, because there hadn't been a tennis game yet. You know what I mean? I started trying to think of like, pastimes that have never had a game. So it's like taxes. But I bet you if you go on Steam, there's a game where you're doing taxes, don't you think?
I mean, I would not be surprised if that's a sequel to Papers, Please.
I've heard that game's great. So tennis came out for the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, in 1984. It was published by Nintendo, and interestingly, some of the early founders of Hudson Soft. Hudson Soft is going to come up quite a bit on this podcast. They produced Mario Party, the Pokemon trading card game, so the TCGG on the Game Boy Color, and this blew my mind. Mike, have you ever heard of Super Mario Brothers Special? I know you've heard of Super Mario Brothers.
Yeah.
So apparently, back in the days when Nintendo wasn't so protective of their IP, they let Hudson Soft publish and produce a Mario game. And it had different level layouts. Enemy behavior was a little bit different. But what really I thought was really cool is that in this version of Super Mario Brothers, you can get the hammer from Donkey Kong. Doesn't that sound cool? Like, I feel like that's kind of an element of that game I always would have liked as a kid, is the ability to just like break through stuff.
So is this, if they were doing that, is this why this is technically our first Mario game?
Yes, I imagine there must have been a good relationship. And also, I just have to mention this. There's another game that Hudson Soft produced from the same era called Nuts and Milk, and you play you play as Milk, trying to get to your girlfriend Yogurt and avoiding the traps set by Nuts. This is according to Lewis Lewin at fandomspot.com. And the most upsetting thing about all of that, of which there's a lot, is that apparently the goal is to get milk into yogurt. And that just sounds horrible. Mike, have you ever poured milk into your yogurt?
No.
Doesn't that sound like a war crime? Like, to me, the nut should be trying to get into the milk. That makes way more sense. But anyway, do you know, Mike, who designed this game? Because if you don't, I think you're going to recognize the name immediately.
Yeah, I do not.
Shigeru Miyamoto. Do you not know who that is? You're about to be. You just got us canceled by all the hardcore fans listening.
I thought I did, but now I'm worried about that.
No, you do. He's the creator of Mario.
Okay.
And he made Zelda, Donkey Kong, Star Fox. He's one of the most prolific game designers of all time. And shall I get into the trivia?
Yeah, I will say. I guess that even more explains why Mario is the referee in this.
Mario's the referee.
Yeah.
And presumably also, something, I think we stumbled upon something even more interesting. I think this would probably be the first time we've ever heard Mario's voice.
Interesting.
Right? I don't think people have realized that, but isn't the referee the one to call out deuce, advantage in, that kind of thing?
I think it's only in text, though.
Well, okay, so that's why I was goofing around earlier. But one of the things I really liked about this game is that it is one of the very earliest examples of character speaking, because so the deuce, advantage in, all that stuff appears on the screen, but you can tell with the bleeps and bloops, they're trying to simulate the word. So when the game is tied 40-40, Mario goes, deuce, and you can hear me say deuce when I go, deuce. You can hear it, right?
Yeah.
Like phonetically, it's similar. So I had an idea, Mike, of having other words. Okay, let's see if you can figure this one out. This one's a color. Blue. What color did I just say, Mike?
Blue.
Okay, one more. This one's a celebrity. Wait, I can do this.
Is that Hasselhoff?
Oh my gosh! Yes. Oh yes. Now I wonder, did you get that because of the Simpsons reference, or did you get that because I actually got that close?
It sounded like Hasselhoff at the end.
All right. So this Tennis was a launch title for both the NES and then later a Game Boy port. So when the Game Boy was launched years later, this game was one of the first games on that as well. It was a big hit in Japan on the Nintendo Versus arcade system, which, Mike, have you been to Japan?
I have not.
So arcades are still very big in Japan. And one of the things I really love about how they do arcade games is that they have two screens on the cabinet. And instead of bumping elbows with the person you're playing with, they stand on the opposite side of the machine. And it gives you more personal space, but it also, creates a bit of mystery. And it's sort of a, me versus, it almost feels like online gaming because you're playing against someone you can't see. You see what I'm saying? It's pretty cool. So that was called the Nintendo Versus arcade system. And this entire game was playable inside the very first Animal Crossing, released on GameCube in 2001. You're familiar with Animal Crossing?
Very vaguely.
Do you know what the premise is? Like, if you had to describe the premise, what do you think it is?
Something with an animals with on an island. I'm led to believe one of them is robbing you blind with selling.
Oh my gosh, that's the mortgage. Yeah. Tom Nook. So Animal Crossing, it's basically just like a life simulator. You design your own house, you go shopping, you meet your neighbors, you garden. It's very, very peaceful. It's my second favorite Switch game of all time. But in the first one, released in GameCube, you could buy a Nintendo NES to decorate your home. And then if you walked up to it and made your character click on it, you could play 19 different NES games, I think pretty much all of which we're going to cover in this podcast. And the whole game was on there. And I love when games do that. Shenmue on the Dreamcast also did something similar, where you could play your Sega Saturn. Do you have any memories of games within games? Ever seen this happen before?
Yes. I actually, weirdly, the closest one I think of, and I think this was although this was more of it's a solitaire game that was in it that I'm not sure if it was fully real. Outside of this, that it's a game that I forget the name of that I have on Steam, where the main thing that you're doing in the game is building circuits for a company.
So it's like a puzzle game?
I'm not even going to call it a puzzle game, because a puzzle game really implies a lot more fun. I got a friend to start playing this, and also did start playing, because each thing is like you get an email like, hey, here's the new project and all this kind of stuff. And
this is a game. You're working for a company in the game. In the game,
and like you've got a desktop in the game. I can't recall. I would have to look it up.
Okay, it's not the Stanley Parable, right? I've never played that, but it sounds okay.
No, this went far enough where it's like you get the email and stuff. And so the whole way this game shows up is someone's like, hey, check out this game that I've got on the network, where it's like my kid made it or something. And it's just like a solitaire based game. And I think there's achievements purely based on how well you can, like, how many games of that you can beat or whatever. Yeah. And it's a hard game. And the whole thing is weird enough that the friend I had playing this eventually is like, are you sure we're not actually working remotely for some weird, like, Chinese company designing this stuff? Because it's a lot of like, build a circuit that can do this, but keep your prices down kind of stuff. And you're like, so it's like, for some reason I was playing this, it's got like a 300-page manual on like components.
This sounds truly insane. Back to tennis. Yeah. Tennis also appeared in the game WarioWare Twisted, which we might eventually get on this podcast as well. So do you want to fire up tennis, or should I talk about the cover, and what do you want to go into next?
I think since you mentioned, let's go ahead. Let's play it, and I'll cut right before you asked about firing it up, and then we'll resume as though we have.
Perfect. So looking at the two covers, one from the North American, one from the European, I just was really taken by just showing the pixelated graphics just on the cover. I kind of miss that about games, where you could like look at it and know actually what the game looks like, because now at times it's just like someone's face and it's like Last of Us Part 2, and it's like, okay, but what is this game going to look like? And the European version, I feel like that is dishonestly exciting looking. Would you agree with that, Mike?
I don't know, because like I appreciate the appeal that is this sort of very pixelated look on the North American version. The European version I do somewhat appreciate, in that it definitely reminds me of the way Atari designs were, because they definitely weren't going to show Atari like graphics on there, because it's just which of the 8 pixels are colored in.
Yeah, it's like, it's a box, and you have to pretend that this box is a gorilla or something.
Yeah, so certainly there's an element of it feels closer to where the artwork really was. How does this get your imagination going for what you're seeing and what it's supposed to look like? So I'm kind of, I stylistically prefer the more pixelated approach. I see what we're doing with the other version, though.
Absolutely. And covering the Joy Pros versus the Joy Cons of these games. Obviously, Mario as a ref, super cute. I liked the voice acting, the deuce. And one thing I liked about this game that I feel like the other tennis games we're going to talk about really struggled with was that it had this, for such an old game, a surprisingly satisfying sense of movement. I liked that my swing and my legs were independent of one another. When I swing in this game, I don't stop moving, or my movement doesn't become jerky or whatever. And I know that that's not really an accurate simulation of the musculature of a person. A real tennis player will not just keep scooting along the court as they swing like that. But it felt more to how I remember tennis feeling. Like, I was very conscious of my racket and my legs. And I feel like in some of these other games, I don't enjoy the way that swinging sort of stifles your movement. Do you get what I'm saying at all?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it definitely feels like there's good movement around. It takes a little bit to get the hang of it, but it was doing a lot more sort of decision on how you're going to swing than I had expected, in that I think it is just you hit a button and it will decide, are you hitting forehand, which is your sort of dominant side, or are you hitting a backhand? It kind of does that for you. And I was a little bit pleased that I didn't have to worry about, where I was in that sense.
And I if I remember the terms you taught us in the first half of this lesson, I believe that you said it was an approach shot is after you serve and then you approach the net. And I really liked in this game how straight off that serve, I can just hold down up on the joystick and I'm just automatically charging the net. And it almost feels like, my momentum of the swing is carrying me. I'm giving the game too much credit because I'm trying to find positive things to say about it. But I just sort of liked that sort of feelings. What did you like about this game?
I was going to actually say I did find this fairly playable.
Yeah.
And that it has sort of 5 difficulty / style.
So I want to talk about that because when we played the game just now, you thought that was difficulty. And that's what I thought too. It's also, or maybe exclusively, because the game just gets harder when you do this, it's the speed of the ball. Did I just blow your mind?
I mean, that is a way of doing difficulty.
Right. I mean, watch this. Let's reset the game real quick. We can cut this if you want to. Let's do a quick doubles match at 5 speed. Feels like a totally different game. Watch this. Oh, is it just me or did the opponents also get a little buffer?
I think it's just the outfit change is giving that sense.
Okay. Well, whoever dressed them did a great job. But see, and and that's also, it's not just the speed of the ball, it's the speed of the whole game. Like at level 5, we're moving across the court faster. Whoa! And still doing just as bad. But that's so badly communicated. And I found this game just cloyingly boring at level 1 speed. And so at least at level 5, that's why I stuck to 3, because it's like just fast enough to be manageable. Oh, you see how fast that went?
I mean, no, quite like literally no.
So that that's something to say for it. I think the Joy-Cons are pretty obvious though. Anyone who tries this game and try it out, it's a nice little curio, but the cons, it's just so bare bones. There's no separate characters, there's no different courts. You just have singles and doubles mode, and as we just discovered, you can only play 2-player on a doubles match. You can't even face off your friend. But there was a sequel called Tennis Versus, and clearly that's the mode they added and was put up in arcades, and I believe there were some home ports as well. And I was like, why would they make a version called Tennis Versus? Isn't all tennis versus? But I think it's exactly like you said. They figured out how to program for the back, the back half of the screen to let an opponent face somebody else as opposed to just programming the front.
Yeah, so I will say the manual does describe those numbers as skill level of the opponent.
Oh, really? The manual ignores the fact that the game is clearly sped up?
Yeah, or rather, they select an opponent from between 1 and 5 whose skill level matches your own, and they describe that as going from beginner to champion. And clearly that is then just how fast things move.
Yeah, interesting.
But yeah, I was going to say, like, I had a few thoughts with this. Like, my first was that I actually found it was really hard to really make an effective move to the net.
Yeah.
So the mid-court area does get referred to as like no man's land. Yeah. Because it's a very bad spot to be. And it was very hard for me to cross that and to get a good idea of height of the ball so that you don't try to make that advance and then just have the ball go over you.
Considering how old the game is, though, and Pong had come out not that much, that many years ago, so just the fact that it clearly looks like instantly recognizable, and as a tennis game, I thought was kind of cool, and it did, I think, have a cool like sense of depth. It really genuinely feels like the player on the top of the screen is further away from you, and the ball, getting smaller as it's knocked across. There's a cool sense of scaling there, I think.
Yeah. So actually, like I think I did generally enjoy this, even though I was a bit frustrated with a bit of that. The fact that it doesn't feel like I have any real control over where the ball is going.
Yeah.
And like that's such a key element to how this works, that this feels a lot closer to just sort of, I hope I hit the ball and that goes someplace in, but that there wasn't as much of a sense of the strategic elements to it.
For sure. I agree. Should we go to the next one since we have 4 of these to cover today?
Yes.
All right, so next up, we've got Super Tennis on the SNES. Released in 1991, published by Nintendo and Tonkin House, which did not make much, but I'm curious if you'll know enough about me to react to this. Tonkin House also published in Japan a game called Super Turrican. Do you have any idea why that's important to me? It's okay if you don't.
I
It's okay, Mike. It's all right. It's not
no,
important.
no, it's weirdly familiar, but I can't.
It's my Xbox name.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say. Is I thought this was a screen name of some kind.
It was directed by Junichi Nakutsuma. I hope I'm saying that right. It seems to be his only game. And some interesting trivia about Super Tennis. It was one of the very first games to utilize Mode 7 graphics. It's a groundbreaking feature of the Super Nintendo. It lets developers take a background layer of graphics and rotate and scale them. So by rotating the background, you can create a sense that the player is turning, and by scaling the background, for example, making something get much bigger, you can create the sense that you are approaching something. So this is how Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo looked like a 3D game years before other competitors were able to do that. In Mario Kart, your car's not moving. The entire level is sliding around you. Do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah, that is fascinating.
Yeah, it's really, really cool. And it was something that the Genesis could not do. And they tried and they didn't do very well. And the most famous use of Mode 7 is Star Fox. And Mario Kart and Star Fox, we'll talk more about the graphics when we cover those games. It is not to be confused with Super Tennis on the Sega Master System, released in 1985. And Mike, I'm going to show you a picture on the screen here. Can you still see the covers of Super Tennis?
Yes.
Here's Super Tennis on the Genesis. What's your first thought when I show you this screenshot of Super Tennis on the Sega Master System? Sorry, not the Genesis, the Master System, which, for those who don't know, Sega had an 8-bit console called the Master System. It never really took off in America that much. What do you know about the screenshot?
I mean, how much this is set up exactly like the tennis we just played, down to the logo on the back left wall.
Yes, it's insane. And to watch, I don't know if you want to just humor yourself and open up a YouTube tab. I'm talking about this. It's like a palette swap. I don't know, maybe this was before people were getting sued for such things, but the movements, the way the ball bounces, the layout, it's just clearly the game that came out on Nintendo like 2 years earlier. But this is Super Tennis on the Super Nintendo. So this is the game we're talking about right now. And was it just me? Did you happen to get a look at the ref in this game?
Not that I remember. Like, I probably saw it, but it didn't stick with me.
Didn't grab you. So the I think the referee is still Mario. Shall we fire this game up and see if you agree that it's also Mario? All right, let's do that. I'm gonna go to game selection. And we're going to go to Super Tennis.
I mean, you're not, because we're in the NES right now.
That's, you know what? You passed my test. Good job. All right. So let's jump back into this then. All right. Going over the covers of Super Tennis, just incredibly dull SNES covers, not even a person on there. But there is something to say about the layout. And I thought that the Super Famicom, that's what the Super Nintendo was called in Japan, the cover clearly advertising the fact that you can play female tennis players, because that is not something that was previously available. Do you have any kind of thoughts on either one of these covers?
I mean, I think not really, other than it is leaning in fairly heavily that this is not just like, oh yeah, we have the standard players and one's a woman. Like, they really did put the female players to the point of almost being the default. So that is right. Almost, I think that they're highlighting that they have broadened this as part of more largely. This is really a lot more fleshed out of tennis. It's not court.
It's Super Tennis, if you will. Do you recognize the player? Because apparently the characters you can select in this game were based on popular tennis players from 1990s or actually probably late 80s based on when this game was made. And they just removed their last names. So I don't know tennis well enough to go through the roster and be like, oh, that's supposed to be Mads Mikkelsen. I know that's an actor, but it sounds like a tennis name. Do you recognize this gal or any of the character names from this game?
I don't, and I hadn't. I think that's a little bit too early for me to know.
Sure, you would have been like, very, very young at this point. So a couple things, I liked about this game, some Joy Pros to go over. It had some catchy music. I really liked that satisfying, like, whack sound. And, it kind of goes into just sort of the attention to detail in this game. There's some animations that kind of make it feel more like a real tennis match. The ball boys, running and, getting the ball off the court for you. You actually see the characters changing sides, which gets pretty tiresome seeing them change every time. It's always the same animation, always the same music. Did you ever actually play to the end of a match in this game?
Yes, I did.
So you see, the players shake hands and the different court surfaces affecting the ball bouncing, and then them using that mode 7 graphics. In the game, it's used to zoom in on the net, makes it feel like the camera's flying right towards the net. And I don't know why. It's graphically, it's kind of cool, but doesn't really add anything to the game. But they did use the mode 7 graphics for that bouncing tennis ball to demonstrate, how the different surfaces give the ball more or less bounce. I thought that was pretty cool. Any thoughts on the way that this game kind of feels more like actual tennis?
I feel like there certainly is a lot more that feels like actual tennis. So you have the ability, you have tournaments in here. You do have, you can set the number of sets. You're not stuck into 3 sets. You have the different surfaces. However, and it looks a lot more like what you expect in an actual tennis court, and that you can actually see the linesman at the back.
Yeah.
And stuff like that. So it looks more real.
Now, you said linesman at the back. Is a linesman job to determine if a ball is in or out? They're just watching the lines?
Yeah, exactly. That is what they're doing. Okay. And that's basically because from their angle, they can see, left or right of the line much easier than the main referee that's at the net
right.
is going to be able to see that.
It's interesting, though, that, we haven't made that job obsolete, because I'm sure they could design a tennis court that lights up exactly where the ball hits. You know what I mean? It's 2023, but some traditions are nice here. Okay. So would you be surprised if I told you I beat this game?
I'm going to say yes, because, or I guess, is that you beat a tournament, or is there something else that represents beating this game?
So you can play a tournament, which is incredibly lengthy. They give you this huge password after every match, because I think if you were to actually play to the end of a tournament, it would take at least a whole day of your life, right? But this game has one of the strangest things I've ever seen. Did you ever fire up the tournament mode?
A little bit, yes.
Okay. So it takes you to different countries, and apparently there's like the Rio Open and like the London Open. It's all based on actual famous tournaments, right? And when you go to each country, it says, do you want to enter this tournament? And there's a yes and a no. Now, I'm assuming you clicked yes.
Probably, yeah.
I thought if I clicked no, I would get to choose a different country and a different tournament. But in this game, if you click no, the tournament happens without you, but you're still on the leaderboard with no points, and it plays sad music. And I had this moment of like, wait a minute, the tournament's over. It auto resolved in 5 seconds, because it just showed me, which players were winning, right? And I was like, can I do this for every tournament? I went to every country. I refused to play a single match, and I got to the end of the game. And you're not going to believe the end of the game cutscene if you never win a single match. It shows you go home with your racket smashed. Okay, so you're actually, let me show you, because it's beautiful. Oh, did I not include it? Oh, I'm so sad. Oh no. Oh, well, okay, hold on. You got to see this. Well, I guess I'll just describe it. You go home with your racket smashed, and then you get kicked out of your own home, and then you're sitting despondent in front of your house for so long that the grass in your backyard grows so high that your tennis court disappears, and then your house collapses.
That is amazing.
It is so much pageantry and drama for this weird game that in no other way seems to have a sense of humor.
Is that just if you, is that just like in general if you lose, or is this literally if you do that bad? Have you looked into this?
Obviously, I didn't try multiple times, but I was just it was one of my favorite cutscenes I've ever seen. And the fact that it's in a Super Nintendo tennis game is just awesome. That's kind of all I have to say about this, the positives of this game. Do you have anything else to praise about Super Tennis?
No.
Okay, so
the rest is the other kid. Yeah.
The Joy-Cons. I think the movement feels really stiff in this game. I really hate that the player stops moving when you hit the swing button. And the reach of your racket never feels quite satisfying. It's almost like you're playing tennis with your elbows against your ribs, and you just can't seem to reach the ball.
Yeah, I think I'd go further into, we already discussed, but that change court animation feels like they're showing off that the court changes, and I guess now at this point feels like they're showing off that they can do sort of the panning involved in that shot.
Right.
But you change sides every 2 games. It gets so tiresome. And it sure
does.
If this was a briefer animation, I would not care. But it's such a long animation that it feels like when you are not doing well at this game, it feels like one game lasts about as long as that animation does.
Yeah.
The camera placement, I have major issues with, as you saw when you played, and you get this situation where if you are on the close side, you cannot see the full court, and that is very frustrating.
It seems like something that even the most basic game designers would have caught. Like, hey, maybe one player shouldn't have half of their screen obscured.
Yeah, ideally. And then for as much as they clearly try to put in a lot of things that would control the ball.
Yeah.
And I feel like it results in, I don't actually feel like I'm controlling the ball. And that feels rather absurd, given that impacting how the ball plays, you have not just the different courts that we're playing on that will impact how the ball moves, supposedly, and that each of the players has their own individual stats that should impact things like how hard they're hitting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Also have control that's supposed to be coming from the timing of your shots, using the D-pad to select a direction you're hitting. The left and right triggers allow you to put spin on the ball.
Oh, I was wondering that. Okay.
Yeah. And the different buttons are for different strokes. So I think like A and B are variations on what kind of stroke you're hitting. So there is like 6 different things that are supposed to be impacting how the ball is being impacted. Did
you learn this from the manual?
Yes.
So we didn't mention it earlier, but kind of a tenet of this podcast is that I'm going to try to be a retro gamer, meaning that I'm going to play retro games the modern way, with save states and rewinds and, looking up things on, walkthroughs. Whereas Mike is going to try to be more gaming. Wait a minute, I'm gaming retro, you're retro. It doesn't matter. Mike's going to do it like they did in the 80s and 90s. He's going to go based on just the manuals and trying not to use the save features.
And rumors that I heard on playgrounds.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have too much more to say about this. I won't go into whether it's a Nintendo or NintenDON'T, but I think we're kind of going to be on the same page on this one.
Yeah, no, my whole thing is it feels like they put so much in here in the sense of style and bells and whistles, and I don't actually feel it adding anything to gameplay for me.
For sure. Am I still sharing my screen? Can you see the screenshot of this despondent cutscene?
Yes.
So you see the broken racket dragging behind her, and then you can see the little tennis court in the back behind the house, and it's just hilarious. Whoever thought of that was a good idea was absolutely right, and I commend them. All right, so let's move on then to Smash Tennis. Smash Tennis released on 1993 for the Super Nintendo, published by Namco, one of the biggest gaming publishers of all time. In fact, I'm pretty sure even you've heard of Namco. Do you know some of their famous brands and IP?
I do not, but I do recognize that name.
Have you heard of Pac-Man? Pac-Man, Tekken, and one of the biggest games of last year, Elden Ring, is all Namco. And then directed by Hideo Yoshizawa, who made games that I'm kind of familiar with, but they're definitely not like, common household names when it comes to video games. Klonoa, Ridge Racer, and Mr. Driller, all really good, primarily known as PlayStation franchises. So Smash Tennis, interestingly enough, was actually the second in a series of games. The original was called Family Tennis, released in 1987 for the NES, and it even had a recent entry on the Switch called Family Tennis SP in the eShop for like, I think $7. And I watched the trailer. It looks kind of cute. It's kind of like a party game tennis designed for the whole family to play. And this game is an interesting tennis game. Should I go into the trivia or should we play it first?
Let's play it first and then come back and pick up with trivia.
Sounds good. All right, game selection. Smash Tennis. Smash Tennis. So, Smash Tennis has an interesting Easter egg contained only in the Japanese release. Have you heard about this, Mike?
No.
So, for some baffling reason, they removed this from all other releases. But in the Japanese version, if you hit the select button 5 times at that main menu before hitting start, it begins what they call Namcot Theater mode. And it has animated cutscenes. It has distinct characters with dialogue. It even has a credit sequence at the end. It's a whole story mode that makes these just generic avatars into likable heroes and villains, and there's like romantic tension. And I can't believe how much time it must have taken to, for some reason, hide this. Wouldn't you have tried that if it was one of the options?
Yeah, no, that would have added a lot more beyond the tennis itself.
Yeah, and it's so strange because I can't even think of even the Mario tennis games, which are still fairly popular. I don't even know if they do a story mode. Like, this is such a unique and cool thing to A, not even translate it, and B, hidden in only a single version of the game. Completely baffling. The covers here are also interesting because if you look at the Japanese version on the right, it has this kind of anime look, which is the story mode that they cut. It's these characters. And then I really dislike this American cover. It just reminds me of like a Sunday comic strip that I would skip on my way to Garfield. What do you think of these covers?
Yeah, no, I think that hits both of them. Is the American one feels somewhat just generic-y cartoon without much, whereas the Japanese one has sort of an epicness to it.
But I don't think either one actually matched what this game looks like or feels like.
That's true, but I'm okay with, we're going to make this look epic, and then it's just going to be tennis.
Yeah, like I would assume based on the American one, this game is going to be funny, and I guess I'll get into that. Absolutely, I think I speak for both of us. The joy pros of this game were the interactive courts.
Yeah, no, that was great to see them be interactive.
So what we're referring to is that there are all these different environments you go to, and each one, there's stuff in the background, and based on where your ball goes, it has different interactions. So are you okay if I just kind of list through these and we can talk about them? So the beach court, which, by the way, is tennis on the beach a thing? Have I just missed this my whole life? My brain says that the ball wouldn't bounce on sand. Am I being dumb?
I'm not terribly familiar with that being done.
Okay, I've seen volleyball, but I've never seen tennis. So in the beach level, there's a little crab going back and forth in the background that you can knock into the water. I was very disappointed that when you hit the spectators who are standing in the surf there, nothing happened with them. Did you get the coconut guy?
No, I looked for interaction on this one. I actually didn't get it. So I did not hit the crab. I did not get the coconut guy.
The coconut guy. So it's closer to the bottom of the screen. So it's like closer to the camera, if you will. Bottom left corner, there's this real buff guy in his swimsuit just leaning against a palm tree. If you hit the palm tree, a coconut falls out and knocks him out cold. It's great.
Oh,
How
that is
about the
wonderful.
resort? The resort was this level. It's a ski resort, but you're not in the snow. You're like in the kind of squeaky, echoey lobby, and there's a bunch of people like watching you from the balcony above, which I thought was a cool trick. And I saw that in the shrine level that we had just played too, where as the camera zooms in on the courts, you're kind of passing architecture and objects that have nothing to do with gameplay, but it's just creating a sense of space around you.
Yeah, and so was there interaction in the resort? Because I did find the way the audio echoes in that place is creepy.
Yeah, it's very chilling, and it really feels like an authentic echo. It's pretty cool. So the interaction with that one is that apparently, if your match goes on long enough, the spectators start to order drinks, and the waitress, you don't even have to hit her, which actually that was even great because I think the first reaction, oh, hit the waitress, make her drop her stuff. No, she'll just get spooked if the ball gets close enough, and she'll trip on her heels and spill the red wine.
That is wonderful.
The shrine, obviously, I'll let you talk about the shrine since you were trying to show me in gameplay.
Yeah, so the shrine is where I discovered this interactivity.
Yeah.
Where I think the first one is that if you hit a ball under the shrine, there is a cat that runs out.
Yes, there is.
And will reposition. And I think you can actually get it so the cat will stick around and then scatter after the next ball.
Wow. I wonder if something happens if like you scare it 3 times, it just gets ticked off and claws you or something. And then, and before I forget to mention this, all of these interactions were detailed on a really fun video on the YouTube channel Gametropolis. Definitely check it out. So thank you for that information, Gametropolis. The best interaction is the mountain court.
Yes.
Okay, so did you get this? Did you get this interaction? So the mountain court, for those of you that aren't going to try the game, it's actually kind of scary because you are playing on the top of what is very clearly an insanely high cliffside, and the wind is whipping, and after every point, your ball just launches off into the ether. It goes woo. There's a little sound effect, and there's like trees, but they're tiny from so high up. And so, Mike, what's the interactivity with this level? It's dark.
Yeah, or well, I guess I should say I didn't see the interactivity part. I saw the change over the game part, which is there is someone that is climbing up the close side of that cliff.
Yeah, he's on the screen right now.
Playing.
Yes, yeah. and it's actually genuinely stressful because if you noticed, this guy like slips and struggles. Like he actually is working his way up this mountain. It's not just one little animatronic kind of feel just going up. He's persevering, as the Gametropolis video said. Did you play long enough to see what happens with him?
I played long enough that he reached the top and has I think he had a flag or something.
Yes, and he plants a flag and he then spends the rest of the match waving at the camera. Mike, if you had to guess what happens if he gets hit by the ball, what would you think happens?
Oh, I hope he falls.
He falls. He freaking dies. This poor guy. It's so twisted to not only let you kill an NPC in the background of a sports game, but to show his struggle to get to that point.
I mean, to be fair, that's not really what they're doing. They're having you kill an NPC in the foreground of the game.
Okay. All right. Well said. Okay. Golf clap for you. Golf clap in the tennis episode, Mike. I think I kind of already mentioned it, but there's just a nice sense of atmosphere in this game. I would even say it actually trumps the feeling of atmosphere in the next game we're talking about, which is a Nintendo 64 game. So, just the echoing, the fog, there's a level with a bunch of fog, there's wind, echo effects, these towering archways. I really got a sense that like I'm playing tennis in interesting places.
Yeah, no, I definitely thought that this game really, it's, I think, genuinely interesting to look at. And I really appreciate that it feels like a neat setting.
Yeah.
That they set all of this with that as a backdrop.
And, Joy Cons for me, things I didn't enjoy. I found some of the sounds overbearing, like the really loud music and the wind effect on the mountain. It's cool, but it's nonstop. And then other things like, the actual recorded human voice, which is pretty cool. Like you actually hear the referee say advantage in. And when you think about old retro games, that was pretty rare back then. But it's so muffled. It sounds like it's coming out of a cereal box. The game also still, and I think it's just all this era of sports games, just a very frustrating lack of control and precision. And the matches felt like they stretched on forever. What rubbed you the wrong way about Smash Tennis?
I don't think much did.
Okay.
I think this is actually the first game where I felt like I actually could control shots.
Yeah.
So you have 4 buttons for 4 different kinds of shots. So A, B, X, and Y are all doing different kinds of shots.
Okay.
And the direction you are holding, I think, also allows you to sort of aim your shot a bit.
Yeah.
And so that, especially in contrast to Super Tennis, that decided to do a whole why are there 6 pedals in 4 directions kind of thing, just figure this out.
Yeah.
This felt like the level of nuance they wanted to put into this actually seemed to be impacting things enough that I felt like I could shape this. I was still getting outplayed a lot, but I felt that I was in control. And simply the fact that it's interactive meant that, missing a shot and then have a bird fly over or hear the plunk in the water is satisfying enough that it kind of offsets the I am not doing well.
Yeah. And when we played the game just now at the shrine level, there's these birds that are atop the dog statues, and it flew across the screen and distracted me enough that I lost the point. I mean, I might have lost the point anyway, but true to life, I blamed it on the bird flying by. And the courts, being so cool, it really made me frustrated that the characters are so cookie cutter. They're just clothing differences, but they already went through the trouble of writing unique personalities for these players because there's a story mode that's hidden. So why wouldn't you put just, you have a portrait for what the character's face looks like. Show that on the character select screen. Like, let me access the stuff you worked so hard on. So it's such a strange decision. Anything else to say about Smash Tennis?
I mean, I guess I can see why it feels like a waste if they did all this work. I wasn't bothered by the character elements of this.
But if you knew that you could have actually known the characters and personalities, doesn't it kind of frustrate you that they went the way they did?
I'm honestly not really. It's tennis. I am not as drawn in on the characters part of this often in games, so I'm not particularly surprised that is not a thing that bothers me at all.
Yeah. Well, speaking of characters in tennis, can we go to our last game?
Yes.
Mario Tennis, released on the Nintendo 64 in 2000, published by Nintendo and developed by Camelot Software, which has done essentially the entire Mario Golf and Tennis series. And they're still working on it to this day. Like, this is a popular series of games. And it's so strange how this timed out, Mike. You'll never guess what other series Camelot Software worked on. They worked on the Shining Force series, which is our next episode.
That's very convenient.
It's very strange that we just randomly chose tennis. And it's like you look at the Camelot Software catalog. It's Mario Tennis, Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, Mario Golf, Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, Mario Golf, Shining Force 3. I'm like, what the heck? Like, where did that come from? It was directed by Koruki Kodera and seems to be someone who's exclusively worked on these Mario Tennis and Mario Golf and Shining Force games. This game was a follow-up. Are you aware that this is actually not the first Mario Tennis game? And I'm not counting the game where Mario's the referee. This is the second game where you play as Mario holding a tennis racket.
I did not know that there was a prior one.
It's because it was on a Nintendo's most spectacular failure. Their worst-selling console.
Wait, no, I do know that the Virtual Boy had this, didn't it?
Yes. So for you youngins out there, Nintendo had a VR console back in the 90s, and it was sort of a portable system in the sense that it didn't connect to your TV. It connected to these VR goggles that were on like this tripod. So it didn't attach to your face. You had to squat down and stick your face into something that was just arranged on your desk. But it was a very rudimentary 3-dimensional VR effect where it looked like you were actually standing behind Mario on the court. And when the ball would be hit, it would get further or closer away to you. That was called Mario Tennis.
So I think I played that.
You played the Virtual Boy? I've never seen one in the wild.
I did when it was for rental at probably Hollywood Video, maybe Blockbuster. One of those had it.
And you said in our previous episode.
Yeah, so we never rented it, but they had it set up as a demo. And so actually, I think this is what I played on it.
That's so funny. I just triggered that memory. So this game's
Hollywood Video is getting a lot of plugs. It's a shame that it doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, if this could be a time traveling podcast, they'd really appreciate it. They'd be a sponsor for sure. So Mario Tennis is probably its most important legacy was the debut of the character Waluigi. What's your familiarity with this guy, Mike?
Mostly general creepiness, but I don't have too much else on it.
Oh, that comment's not gonna age well at all. So Waluigi is the quote unquote evil version of Luigi. He is, if this was an SAT, equation, even though those things don't exist anymore, Mario is to Wario as Luigi is to Waluigi, right? And so some interesting things about Waluigi. So his name Waluigi is because Warui means bad in Japan. So it's a pun. But Waluigi wears a hat, just like Mario and Wario and Luigi do, but it's an L that's upside down. Do you know why that vexes me, Mike?
Is it because flying upside down means distress?
Make that up?
No, that's what you do with flags.
Oh. That's actually really clever. Okay, I don't hate it anymore. Okay, you know what? You win this round. It bugs me because Mario wears a hat with an M, right? Luigi wears a hat with an L. If Waluigi wears a hat with an upside down L, then that means Wario's hat does not have a W on. That is in fact an upside down M. Do you see what I'm saying?
Have you considered that neither of those are letters, and in fact, they're just threes on different orientations?
I hate you. I hate you right now. Okay. So the backstory of Waluigi is really wild. So I didn't want to cite this as a source because I'm trying to find when exactly this was published. But it's appeared in enough different ways on the internet and different quality of scans that's clearly this is not like one person's prank. This is clear. This is something that my research has led me to believe is actually from a Nintendo Power issue. So it's a bit of a read, but would you mind if I teach you about Waluigi? Because this was all new to me.
All right.
So whenever Wario would be invited to Mario's lame parties for tennis tournaments, he would always feel left out of the fun. Mario had a brother Luigi he could team up with, but Wario was born an only child. He got all the attention as a child, which was awesome and totally great for him growing up, but now he didn't have a doubles tennis partner. So embarrassing. Yoshi laughed at him in front of everyone. Wah! Next paragraph. Wario wouldn't be embarrassed ever again. He went online to an actor for hire site, and lo and behold, there he was, Jimmy Papadopoulos. Or maybe you might recognize him by his legally and permanently changed name ever since 1999, Waluigi. Wario hired him for freelance for the tennis tourney. The rest is history, or is it? Let's just say that their relationship had some rocky beginnings, but rumors say that it blossomed into a great friendship and maybe even a romance. Oh my gosh! Mike, according to Nintendo Power, which let's be clear, right? This is not necessarily canon, but Nintendo does or did sign off on the issues of Nintendo Power. It was a magazine published by Nintendo. Do you understand?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just funny because it's like, who is this going to upset? Is it going to upset the jerks who don't like that he might be gay? Or is it going to upset the people who don't like his real name being Jimmy Papadopoulos? What are you feeling right now, Mike?
So he's hired for this.
Yes.
And then also a romance. And so
No, Mike, no. I don't know who's going to listen to this. You have to keep it classy. Wow. All right, changing the subject. Waluigi, if you're not aware, though, he is considered sort of like a gay icon to some people. And I never knew why until I researched this game. But something that absolutely did not age well was, I guess, while developing this game, Camelot, because it wasn't made by Nintendo. Camelot actually developed it and Nintendo just published it. Camelot wanted to give Waluigi and Wario girlfriend characters, just like how Mario and Luigi have Daisy and Peach, right? And according to Nintendo Power issue 135, Shigeru Miyamoto replied, I don't even want to see what their girlfriends look like. Now, I added the look like part, but, I don't even want to see their girlfriends. I feel like it was this really, like, sexist, horrible, like, oh, they must be ugly. And it's like, oh, that didn't age well at all. That's the Waluigi legacy of Nintendo Tennis.
Yeah, no. With all of that, it seems like the Waluigi background, in terms of how much there is to it and what it is very Spartan.
Yeah, and Waluigi is an important character. He often represents the underdog, someone who's overlooked, and I never knew, this whole kind of potentially gay background of the character, and I think that's actually pretty cool. And I'm worried though, because I feel like it might have been born out of like homophobia, like it was seen as a joke because they're the evil characters or they're so gross, you know what I mean? I don't know that this was intended to be a part of the character that would be celebrated, and I'm guessing that's probably why it hasn't come up again officially. So anyway, should we try this game and then talk about it a little bit?
Yeah.
So jumping back into it, we've talked about the background Waluigi here. Not too much to say about the cover. Just found it interesting that the cover is so similar, but someone in Japan, or I assume, had the idea of making it look like the camera is like the perspective of the ball. Do you see what I'm saying? Almost looks like Mario is going to hit us on that Japanese cover on the right.
Yeah, I think it's just a zoom in past the ball.
Yeah.
In Japan, was this then like Mario Tennis 64 or Tennis 64 or something?
Clearly, yeah. Good catch. I didn't notice that before. And I also didn't notice this amazing description around the yellow ring there. It says on the Japanese version, well, on the English version, it says Mario and friends serve up another ace, which is interesting because the previous tennis game was absolutely not an ace. And the Japanese version says, for all players hoping to touch the true entertainment. Heck yeah. I have a lot to say about this game as far as positives go. I think the game has a lot of personality. The characters, with their voices, their animations. I was just playing as Donkey Kong, and when he dives for the ball, he kind of does almost like a little roll like he does in the Super Nintendo games. There have different rackets. Yoshi has the egg on his racket. Bowser's racket is spiked. It's just the only one of these four games where there's actually feels like I picked a character instead of I picked a t-shirt. What do you think about the characters in the game?
Yeah, I mean, they do have the advantage that it's characters that you already somewhat know, but they really did stylize this to them.
Yeah.
And it's so funny. And like they reflect it with the additional courts that are based around them as well.
Yeah. And like the Bowser court with the special Bowser mode where you attack each other with items, it's like swinging over a pit of lava. And I don't know that the actual swinging really changes the bounce of the ball all that much noticeably, but it feels cool. It feels exciting to have that. It's funny too, because the Mario characters are so consistent now. Like Mario looks the same in Mario Kart, Mario Golf, Smash Brothers. They know his proportions, and they hadn't quite figured that out yet. So Bowser kind of looks a little off in this game. His head's kind of too small for the rest of his body to be the Bowser that we know. Did you watch the opening cutscene?
Yeah, I have a note on that I think they put Yoshi audio on Toad talking.
Oh, did they? I didn't notice that. I was struck by Luigi in the opening cutscene, because Luigi in the opening cutscene squares up against Wario and Waluigi, and in this very deep voice he says, "Luigi not afraid." And you get why that's funny?
I mean, isn't his whole thing being afraid? And like,
yes, it is a defining characteristic of the character now. And what might have been one of his very first speaking roles was about how much bravado he has. So I was like, wow, he is. People change, how times change.
I mean, maybe it's channeling more of Luigi's energy from the movie.
Would sound like Wazamo?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I also really love the music in this game. It creates tension. So when it's a match point, like the guitar kicks in down, 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 and it's like makes you feel the excitement of the match being almost over. all the characters have their iconic, grunts and woohoos and all that kind of stuff. So just production wise, I think the game has actually aged really well. I think it looks pretty good even today. What do you think about the look of the game?
Yeah, no, I think it looks great. It still it has. I like that they do a lot of stuff where this has the sense of what you would expect for a tennis layout, but they've Marioized it.
Yeah,
so
Marioized it.
So you have things like the bombs in the background in the places that you'd have the linesmen in a regular tennis match.
Now, how much does it bother you that when you hit the bomb with a ball, they don't explode?
I mean, a regular linesman usually doesn't explode when you hit them either.
Yeah, but in certain rules, do you know how to make the ball bomb explode? You just get
was that if it's out or something?
Yeah, which is strange because that bomb is just committing suicide because it's so upset. I don't know. I thought that was. I didn't see the correlation between the ball going out and the bomb exploding. To me, it makes more sense if you hit it. But
how else is it going to announce it's out?
Yeah, exactly. The also, it's far and away the best controlling game. You can kind of play it however you want to play it. You can just sort of tap the button to swing when the ball gets near you. You can hold down the button to charge up your hit, or you can tap the button once to ready your hit and then tap it again to swing. And that's interesting because it almost is like the Mario Golf mechanic, which was the game that Camelot made first. In Mario Golf, you press one button to start your swing, and then you press the second button to bring your swing down into contact with the ball. And you can cancel your swing by pressing the Z button, or in the case of the Switch Pro controller, the ZL button. And it was so much easier once I got used to that. Trying to play it the other ways, I found very frustrating. What was your preferred way to play this game? Did you charge your hits? Did you double tap, or did you just tap once and just win?
I think it was usually double tap because you can also switch up your hit a little bit between the two buttons.
Yeah.
So there's some combination. And I do appreciate that this. It's interesting that after the very first game we played, where it's like one button is the hit button, we went to very complex, and then I think it simplifies back down until it hits here that feels like a much better level, where you really just have two buttons for hitting two different ways that you can combine a little bit to give some control.
Yeah.
Without it being overwhelming.
For sure. I do wish, though, because if you think about the Nintendo 64 controller layout, you had the C buttons, so B, A, and then 4 C buttons. And on the Switch emulator, those become the right joystick. But I didn't enjoy, if you want to hit a lob shot in this game, you have to hit A to charge your swing, but then B to finish your swing. And that hits it up. And it's the same way backwards. If you hold down B, which is, I think, like your slice, if you tap B first, but then end with the A button, that's like a drop shot where like it barely bounces. I don't know if that's the right term. And I found myself wishing, man, I just wish there were different buttons for these hits. I wish there were 4 hits. There was like the forehand, the backhand, the lob, and the is it called a drop shot when you deliberately make it not bounce much?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's like you have the buttons there. Why didn't you use all the buttons? But I mean, it's nitpicky in the way that it feels like I could get used to this. And once you get used to it, it's probably pretty intuitive.
Well, also because you then have the additional ability to hit both at the same time for the smashes. And I really enjoy that this actually, more than anything else, does a much better job of visually giving you a clue of when you actually have the opportunity to do that.
I was confused, though, because like the star shot. So what Mike's talking about is that a star will appear on the court when your opponent is like vulnerable. And that means that the ball is high up in the air and you have the chance to smash it down. But I never figured out how to do these right. Do I have to stand in the star?
You have to be very close to it, and you have to hit A and B at the same time.
Okay. And does is there some animation to show that you got it right?
You'll see a different color on the hit. So you have the blue and reddish are the two normal colors.
Yeah, and purple.
Depending on the spin, purple is this on the smashes.
Right. And you can do a smash without the star appearing. But I think maybe it's stronger with the star. So, yeah, I mean, my only real criticism of the game, once I got used to it, was that when I was playing through the tournament, it felt like such a missed opportunity to have more Mario levels. And later Mario tennis games would do this. So I'm kind of complaining about a problem they already fixed. But to not have like an ice level and a desert court when those are cool places you go in Mario. And then also I wish that like incorporated into the tournament, there were the items that you are using against your opponent in the Bowser mode. There's the Mario Kart weapons. You can attach a banana peel to your ball, and the banana peel will stick on the court wherever the ball landed on your opponent's side. And if they step on it, they slip. You can shoot shells that scoot under the net and smack your opponent, distract them. You can even get a power star, which makes you faster and hit stronger and, run over obstacles. It's a really cool idea. It doesn't work the best, but it bugs me when Nintendo does this kind of a lot. They have a really cool game mode, but then in the solo player mode, none of that cool stuff is in there. And you're just kind of like, I felt bored because I knew there was a more fun mode I should be playing, but I really wanted to see what happens when you win a tournament. So I guess, my criticism is just that like this game could have easily been even better, but that's still pretty good praise. What's your final thoughts on this game?
I was just say, so first of all, as a general tennis thing, yeah. I really think like I felt in control of my shots in this a lot. And I really enjoy that because it makes this feel like it's not just, I hope I hit this and it goes somewhere good. I feel like I'm in a lot of control of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. Perhaps it's that control of my shots thing, which is also why I'm like, I really dislike the items version.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So I much preferred playing this without that. I did a little bit with the items to try it out, but I much preferred like doing the tournaments and trying to work through those.
Yeah.
And I was saying, and I like with that there is a distinct different sense to playing against different characters.
Yeah. So what Mike's referring to is that the characters have different stats. So like Donkey Kong and like Bowser hit harder, but they don't move as well. And so it absolutely is a sense of like, don't play this game and then decide you don't like it if you've only tried one character, because they really do feel very different in how they handle. So I saw you play as Yoshi when we played together. Is that your tennis player of choice?
Yeah, I think there's Yoshi kind of, I think, is just my pick of choice in general.
Yeah.
On these things.
Sure.
But also, this is the fun of a game. I get to play as a character that moves fast on a tennis court.
Yeah. So are we ready to wrap up our conversation and make a judgment call on each of these?
I would say the last thing I'd add with this is because there's so many settings, there's so many options, there's so many things to unlock, and the gameplay is fun. This is definitely one that like I want to keep coming back and trying to unlock things. Like there are characters that I know I can unlock and I didn't unlock because you have to beat a lot of things.
Yeah. What are the characters? Did you look into it?
I did, and then I forgot.
Okay. I know that there was so interestingly, here's one last bit of trivia for you. Mario Tennis on the N64 was one of the only games to use the transfer pack. Are you familiar with this peripheral?
No.
It connected Game Boy cartridges into your N64 controller. Its most famous use is Pokemon Stadium. You could slap this, little thing where the rumble pack or the memory card would go, and you can plug Game Boy cartridges into it, and you can take your Pokemon from the Game Boy game into the N64 game and see them in 3D. It was so cool. Like felt mind-blowing when I was a kid. This one, Mario Tennis, had a Game Boy Color version, and it had, I'm going to call them human characters because their proportions were more realistic than like Mario's are. And that version had like these 4 kind of human trainers that you could unlock in this game by transferring it over. And you could also unlock a bunch of extra courts. They were all just, a court with like Yoshi's face in the middle. Oh, this is the Donkey Kong court, because it looks like it didn't transport you to different areas. It was just like a skin, but still kind of cool, an early form of like the amiibo or like DLC way back then in 2000. So it's kind of neat. All right, so ready to move on to, I guess, what we'll call our rankings, NintenDO's or NintenDON'Ts?
Yep.
So I kind of thought since we did 4 of these here, we could, go through them each and then maybe rank them as far as we think. So starting off with tennis on the Nintendo. That, as much as I appreciate it for being kind of the first of its kind, it's just, you're just not in enough control to be satisfying. It's a NintenDON'T for me. What is it for you?
I'd go Nintendo. It's
Really?
fairly simple and bare bones, but I think it's very functional for what it is, and it it's pretty quick to get going. A
Yeah.
bit of a time commitment because of the set lists,
Yeah.
set lengths, but I enjoyed it.
Okay. So then going on to Super Tennis, I feel pretty confident in saying that this is going to be a NintenDO'N'T for you.
Oh yeah,
I will say though, if you have Nintendo Switch Online, because this isn't even for the expansion pack, so almost anyone who's listening to this probably has access to this game. Play a tournament, but don't enter any games just to see this cutscene. In fact, Mike, you should do that later, just because it takes about 2 minutes of your life, and it's definitely going to make you smile to see that person's house collapse as they are despondent for not winning a single match. So it's a NintenDO'N'T for me. That
yeah.
doesn't really count as an actual recommend. Um, and then Smash Tennis, for me, closest yet to a true recommendation, but I still got to give it a NintenDO'N'T. I think I would get just as much joy out of YouTubing the interactions or going to, what was that YouTuber? Going to Gametropolis's channel and just watching it, to see the fun court interactions. I just don't think there's a reason to play this when you have the last game on our episode today. Are you a Nintendo for Smash Tennis?
I think I'm leaning towards Nintendo. It's not a strong Nintendo.
It's not a strong it's not a super Nintendo, if you will.
Yeah, it's not one of them.
Yeah.
But I enjoyed it, and I kind of feel like if I could get a little bit better, I'd have a lot more fun with it.
Yeah, definitely would have been a Nintendo for me if they had left in that story mode, for the American release and translated it. And then Mario Tennis. I gotta admit, I used to be a big Virtua Tennis boy. In fact, I remember you and I would play Virtua Tennis, and then you got this, and you told me this was better, and I said you're stupid, and I didn't like you for a minute. But I think that this actually might have more depth than my boy Virtua Tennis, as much as that pains me to say, because I was a Sega kid growing up. I think that Mario Tennis, if you're interested in a tennis game and you have a Nintendo console, I think this is a pretty solid Nintendo. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it. I think it is a Super Nintendo.
Super Nintendo. Should we have a ranking for that? Like, if it's a legit good game, not even for what it is, but just you should definitely try it. Let's call that. Let's do that from now on. This is a Super Nintendo.
We'll see how many shows that last before that loses its luster. But yeah, no, I think
probably
it's
not long.
Solid. It was pretty easy to come back to.
Yeah.
It has a lot going on. I kind of think there's something for anyone to find.
Yeah. And so then would our rankings be Mario Tennis is the best, followed by Smash Tennis, NES Tennis, and then Super Tennis?
Yeah, I think that's a solid ranking there.
Awesome. Well, Mike, this was really fun. I was surprised at how much there was to learn about this. Thank you for sharing your tennis knowledge. Thanks for playing with me. And listeners, if you enjoyed this, then maybe consider liking, following, and subscribing. This is just like our second episode, but I've had a lot of fun talking about it. I hope you've had as much fun listening to us talk about it.
And coming up, we'll have.
Yes, so next week we are diving into Sega's forgotten RPG series Shining Force. We're going to be playing Shining Force 1 and Shining Force 2. So if you are interested in 90s 16-bit RPGs, maybe consider playing along with us. Hop on Nintendo Switch Online if you have the expansion pack. Give them a try, and then give us a listen for the next episode. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Mike. I was very surprised at how much I enjoyed our conversation about tennis games. And those of you listening, I hope you've had as much fun listening to us go on and on as we've had fun just diving into those conversations. So thank you again for listening and being here. Please like, follow, and subscribe if you think we deserve it. This has been the Old Switcheroo, talking gaming retro with Mike and Jaymo.
I've been Mike.
And I've been Jaymo. We'll see you next time. Oh, that happens. Yeah, gotta impress Mario. Here we go. All right, that's all you. That's all.